랑도 되지 에메시 나네 동안에 봐 세디 삼단하디 간에 땅고래 세디 어다 동안에 동안도 유 동안 잡아도 유 동안 안되네게 네 삼단하지 되네 안될 삼자고 있다면이나 야고 자고 안에 되네 네 코알레시 시엠바 로비게 론나마시기리스 코와딜레 님부기님도 코와딜레 님부기님도 코와딜레 미치견 차상 통데 님부메바 통그리에서 진들로 나마시기리에서 이거시와레
Good afternoon. This morning we spoke about how to meditate, how to reflect on true sufferings by means of the threefold division: suffering, looking at the suffering of physical and mental pain, the suffering of transient happiness, and all pervasive suffering of conditionality. And the purpose or the conclusion with reflecting on true sufferings is to develop a revulsion for cyclic existence.
아다디네 다코와레 니보 민도 셈베게다 코와레 니보 지조다 아주 풍부 될 니보 민도 셈베 통하도 안데 디간스 중화레 셈베게다 디가와레 디는 중화레 셈 삼다에도 코르도 이는 군중 삼바레스 군주 셈베고네 코르웨 자와레 레년 남스 레버 미시나 빈마통위게 다테바다 남기네 남체지 시발르베 람마임바 마임발레 임버손에 마와지고 메버기에 실랑스
Reflecting then on true sufferings well, leading to the revulsion for cyclic existence, one then thinks, now returning to the text, in the middle of this big chapter, paragraph on page 156, if you do not reflect on the origins and come to a good understanding of karma and afflictions as the root of cyclic existence, you'll miss the crucial point of the path, like someone shooting an arrow who does not see the target.
아나 군주를 삼다이도 지나다 콜베 동아디게 간세스 지나 유단기 메발레 중고 말에 유단기 엔치를 중고를 유간스틸 중고에 셈베게 제바치알레도 군주를 제바체바 중고래 지자디니게 군주 셈비고니에서도 군주를 제바체바서 제바체 간에 제바체선다 그 동아 풍보디 안주 풍보디 유 가rel레티니 기고스네 레다 레라티니 기고레 레 간사고르스네 녀모마티니 기고레 에세지 어두시네 삼다이레 제자한테게 풍보디 레라티니 기와네 레디 가르쳐도 유 녀모발레티니 기고레 에세사고레스 다 레사에게 녀모바로 시나페나 주게 그냥 나서로 시나 되네 마송기 풍보디게 유 레라테 레디 유 안에 베르심제 소제비 소주리게 삼군어디나 단요모바 자로 소주리게 삼군어디 소주게 삼바디 녀모바로 소주베 셈비군에 랑제 네 소주도 소주베 레디사 레디기 되고디다 코알레 마송기 알렘바 니나 싱아주 미르루디 야이나 아주 룰레티 레라티니 겨와와 다리디 게레로와 제자당 안저 게레레 추름소와 추름소이 레라 수때는 기기고로 아주 룰이 다 게레레티니 겨와레데 이나다 데라 아니 레디 규데라야 아니 녀모여라 마리바여라 마리부군에 나와래 해서 녀모 마리부군에 나와 니나시 레데양 아주게 편지레다 시벨레 신용으로 레니용으로 시벨레 펜벨레다 시벨레 가슴 티네 야라 주의도 마리 주시에 남시 텐제 세발렘바 시바시오로와 시벨레 제자 시벨레라 티네 겨와레 제자 시벨레디 용원라야 아니 세발레 렘바티게 녀모바티게 원도 주고 그래 제자 녀모발레 티네 겨와레 해제 제자다 저래 아주 공부디 미루기 공부디네야 레라티네 겨와레 레디야 아니 녀모발레티네 겨와레 녀모가레스 세발레 렘바 토메 마리바 어두슬레티네 겨와레 해제 두 삼다에도 ane de ana ga kunjo samda ya de jeba je samda hago de kunjo samda ya ko ele tupchigele ya la tupchigele pembele na tupchigele se roda tupchigele de siba de tupchigele siba ta tupchigele ni chipare
True sufferings are a result. So suffering is always a result. It's come from something. And so what is the cause or the origin of suffering? It is contaminated karma and afflictions. So true origins are the causes for true suffering, or to be more precise, we suffer because of the causes of contaminated karma and afflictions. If those causes were absent, no suffering result would follow. These aggregates, the body and mind, that upon the basis upon which we experience suffering, have come about independent on karma, and that karma is contaminated because the motivation that led to the accumulation of karma, that motivation was contaminated by the afflictions. So as the motivation was contaminated by the affliction, so too is the resulting karma contaminated. So let's take, for example, being born in hell. So being born in hell, that rebirth there is the result of karma, of non-virtuous karma. And that non-virtuous karma will be contaminated by an afflicted motivation. So as contaminated karma, the motivation would have been non-virtuous and afflicted. So the motivation would have been to, for example, to kill. And then the negative karma of killing was accrued. And when it ripens as a rebirth, that rebirth in hell has come about in dependence on this contaminated karma. But this process is the same for ourselves who have a rebirth in the higher realms, a rebirth in the happy migrations. So the primary difference between our rebirth and that in the hell realms is a hell realm rebirth came about in dependence on the ripening of non-virtuous karma, whereas our rebirth as a human being has come about in dependence on the ripening of virtuous karma. So this virtuous karma ripens into rebirth as a human being. But this karma too is contaminated for the same reason, in that the motivation when this virtuous karma was accumulated was contaminated by the presence of the afflictions, most probably that of ignorance. Therefore, contaminated karma was accrued, and accrued because of the presence of the afflictions and the motivation, and therefore when it ripens in rebirth in cyclic existence. But as it was a virtuous imprint that ripened, one was reborn in the happy migrations, in our instance as a human being. And the role of karma here, there are two aspects. There's the propelling karmic imprint, which would be that of either virtuous or non-virtuous karmic imprint that propelled the rebirth. In our case, it was a virtuous karmic imprint that propelled the karmic imprint. And in the case of being in the lower realms, such as the hell, it was a non-virtuous karmic imprint that propelled the rebirth. And this karmic imprint was ripened by actualizing factors within. Now, if we look at the presentation of the 12 links, it was ripened by actualizing factors, which are craving and grasping. So craving and grasping ripened the propelling karmic imprint into the attainment of existence. So for those who are familiar with the 12 links, These are the 8th, 9th, and 10th links, with existence being the 10th link. So the existence comes about in dependence on the actualizing factors of craving and grasping. So in this way, we see the role of the afflictions in the ripening of the propelling karmic imprint, and hence the result is one remains bound in rebirths, uncontrolled rebirths, in samsara.
Dus chene cheba cheyandu chesangandu pungbo-di lela tene chungwari le diya ne sike anzuge de diya nyomoba seba de lemba antewi tome marikba tene chungwari sidu chesada anzugo dungayi yu le da nyomoba di korwe zawa le da nyomoba imba di yabu chagu re siwroda chesada korwe zawa nyomoba dase marikba timba da hagu re korwe zawa le da nyomoba di tenegi kunjul ya dus kare kanis chungare dus cheba macheba ina no korwe zawa le da korwe zawa le la tene kewa imba na le dia nyu nyomo bale temba di ha gu mares ya par mashena di ha mo na ne karisho ben ma tho da tekpa tar se de tam a ju ben da ru ke we ne da mem da ra jem na da ra jem na phani kep sa di shi kare na di ta ta je ha go je di le sin ja wo wa de ma tho na ne 예, 강조만 얘기했나? 다다 책을 말와. 디나시 요콜베 자와 뉴모바데 가는 바야 한 먹어 봐 있나? 람고 바이네. 델레니 뭐 임바 다다 제도 말레스. 지산디 예, 다다 벤 뭐다. 다 파마나시레스. 지다 당보 네 군주에 대바도 치네. 삼나다 도시네. 레라데네 레다 뉴모 우차상 어제 자위기 뉴모바 타마데 가와지 뉴모데 야고지 하고 그래서 진제바체 삼다면 하고 디제바체 마체바는 삼하고 말에 하 먹거나 아니 벤모도 다대와 나신 람곰바이나양 아니 디녀보다 다지 용 말에 지르다 녀모레 세발레마 세바다 렘바 지나다가서 개와 밀리케아이나 세바다 레바데 녀모바체 아니 시바디 개와레 siba ke lerowa seba lemba siba yungurwa chuba di siba rowa di kewa cha gore ene yana lerowa ke wile di chupchi ke le si or chupchi ke le ta di ma kan nyomo bare.
Just to reread that same sentence. If you do not reflect on the origins and come to a good understanding of karma and the afflictions as the root of cyclic existence, so just that far. So thus far in our teachings, we've spoken last year about the propelling karma that ripens into a rebirth, and that can be virtuous or non-virtuous. If virtuous, one's born in the higher realms; if non-virtuous, in the lower realms, the happy migrations and the suffering migrations. Here, and so that karmic imprint, when it was accumulated, there was the presence of the afflictions in the motivation. Hence, it's an afflicted karmic imprint. So in this section on the Four Noble Truths, which, let's say, implicitly or can present the 12 links of dependence arising, we can look in a little more detail. And at the time of death, two afflictions of craving and grasping, the 8th and 9th link, these afflictions sequentially, craving and then grasping, ripen the karmic imprint called existence, or translated also as becoming, which is the 10th link. So in this way, we see at the moment when the propelling karmic imprint is ripened, so that is the 10th link of existence, then it is ripened by these two immediately preceding karmic imprints of craving and grasping. So this is a further way that the afflictions and karma result in our ongoing rebirth, including when we attain a desired rebirth, an excellent rebirth, as, say, a human being with a precious human rebirth. As long as one is bound in samsara, this process continues to play itself out. So this needs to be understood well. So there's a presentation in terms of the 12 links. One will also have familiarity, the general presentation on ignorance and its role. So this needs to be known well, and that's what's referred to in the first half of the sentence. If you do not reflect on the origins and come to a good understanding of karma and afflictions as the root of cyclic existence, you will miss the crucial point of the path, like someone shooting an arrow who does not see the target. The second part of the sentence then. If one does not understand the origins of our suffering, or the cause of our suffering, one does not understand this well, one is going to misdirect one's attention to eradicate the cause. We'll be striving to eliminate something else. We will have misperceived what it is that we need to abandon. And the analogy is given. I don't know how many of us here have engaged in either target shooting with a gun or with a bow and arrow, but we at least know the process. If you want to strike the bullseye, you need to identify the correct target, not someone else's, not somewhere else, but the correct one. Then there is a good likelihood through training you will do so. Without correctly identifying the target, you're not going to hit it. So to be able to eradicate the causes and the origins of our suffering, ignorance and afflictions and karma, this process needs to be known well.
아니 남제네 남체신 시벌 주베 람마임발라 임벌 손에 나와 주고 매벌 규비 실시도 제사다 안저기 코와를 주 코와들을 주고도 삼체 람지 녀모바디 코이기 싸와 녀모바디 다다 하모고 같이 안다들이야 저기 코와를 주베 탑에 람데 딘디고 콤바인데 람마임버질 람임버 손자다 디리 더 코와를 주베 탑람 디리에 선배 삼나 콤바인나 디 안에 가서 콤바인네 야가 유명부 콤바인네 디 안에 깔레몽부 자르데 안에 시벌 주베 람레요 말 진짜 디곰베기 제부 코와를 주가디 용거 말해서 제단디 깔레 임바 손에 나와 까와 깔레 잡주 콤바디 된다요 말해서 코와를 주베 제부도 두고 말해서 제부 매버 규리 치르세요.
So in the sentence, the crucial point of the path. So this is referring to the object that needs to be abandoned, eradicated, common particular afflictions and particular ignorance. That is the crucial point of the path. Then the next sentence, you will perceive as the path that which is not the path to freedom from existence, whereupon your hardships will be fruitless. So here's the word existence. So in reference to the 12 links, craving, grasping, and existence, this is the karmic imprint that is ripened into rebirth. It's another word also for samsara. If one does not perceive those crucial points, the previous sentence, the crucial points of the path, one will put one's time and energy into something that cannot lead to the desired result. And in that way, all one's efforts and striving will be fruitless.
다 되네게 삼다에 군중을 삼바 당은 군주에 대한 공부하시고 되네게 대한 점마다 시신대 남면 셈션도 명령하지 되네게랑 삼다지 공부인자 제바지 두신 제바지도 군주에 대한 공부 그냥 공부를 가르치 중앙에 두신 점나데 예 당은 두신 삼다도 당은 라바 삼다 하고도 아주 된가지 수부대 가와니 개발해서 아미기 고반 마 개발해서 아미 고반기도 가능스 두어래서 야야야 삼다이도 지 아미기 내 파미기 구라 뒤발에 되네 수부 두고래서 안데 아진 안에 파미 구라 뒤발에 영어 수부 두고래 베스네 두뱅이야요 말와다 안데라 가르고 거스네 다 넘버 쉐바 슈바시 고고래서 넘버 쉐바 슈고고와 이 넘버 슈바디 레기 견제 마슈고래서 레라 띵고래서 다네 레디 간 슝고래서 당아저 개위레레이나 다 레디 안에 가와스네 개왕 아마 시베레 가서 두비레 해야 돼 두비기레 해서 델레티니 오래 세상 디가레 되는 것은 Dinelia, Seba the Lambas. Seba the Lambas said, Delia, you tell a Geo leg, Jimbaina, the nigger usually Chapas Liore, Chapat, the Sebas or Chapas and Seba, Delia Gawati Ligore. Di Nuba Shuk Church do Lambana Gore, so then the nigger Ligore, on do Dini in your mores, usually Chapat, Seba Lamba Yum, that detail at the legal was. That Disokaze Ligors and the Aya to the Dani, the Namshi dinner town, and the Pinchi lay, the Sulio, the Dianta Kawalius, say you go on Marik passing. Several Nazi arranging to what's in the leagues. That is our Nazi, quality, you our Chazan, so our Tardudi doesn't marry, but it was and because somehow going to do, send Java how could you, and the Kunju House, the Kunju, Chunkunju, Java, Kunju Com said, Jobom Jeje, who's how would it, Kunju by the Mocha Chagorwa. Did you Seba Limbalura, Dina Carwas and Dine, Namshi Dinde, Dine Penji Lays or Penji Lay toward the Penji lady, one of the Maripas and Atisha was a big Maripat Ligoro. So the Tavik Maripache, Maripata, Maripachin, Dine Lesa, Penji Lays our Penji Lays and the Namshi Dinde. Disum Dunyam Dunyam Deligore, Pardon Sherayomare. Yamda Maripa, Penji Lay. Namshi Tinja Sumdi, Yamdu Ligore, Juju Sharayo para Tumbo Sharayo Mare. That D. Jela Carlias Seba the Lemba said, Seba the Lemba, Siva Sumdi, Yamdu Ligore, Juju Unigo Mare, the Mavare. That Marik Pada and Penji Le, the Namshi Tinja Tsar. Then Seba the Lemba, Magia para Dilla Yamdu Unigo or Loma give us and take a part of Sheva Yungore, the Linda so Yungore.
This morning, in this section of text, we looked at the meditation on true sufferings. Now we're looking at the meditation on true origins. So true origins, to engage in the meditation, again, it's as all of these will be, it's an analytical meditation, and to engage in it effectively, one needs to rely on vigilance and mindfulness, again, as presented this morning. So one part of the meditation for us is very easy to understand. So we reflect how we entered into this particular life. We are all born from our mother's womb, and to be born from our mother's womb, there was the preceding cause of a fertilized egg, but that alone is insufficient. Our consciousness needed to enter that fertilized egg. So this part of the process we can all understand without any further study. But here, where we need to look more carefully, is this process that has led to the propelling of our consciousness through the ripening of propelling karma into in this case, the fertilized egg. So what led to the propelling of the karmic imprint, or in terms of the 12 links, the 10th, that of existence, is being the ripening factors of the afflictions of craving and grasping. So craving and grasping, in our normal presentations, we haven't spoken about this much, but craving is attachment. Grasping, craving, the 8th link, is attachment. The 9th link, grasping, is a stronger form of attachment. So attachment is what is ripening the 10th link of existence and leading to rebirth. So these in the 12 links, these three I've mentioned now many times: craving, grasping, and existence. There are a further three that in our normal teachings you would have heard about, but here also as part of the 12 links. These are ignorance. In this here, ignorance will be the ignorance of self-grasping, karma, or in this context, karmic formations, but it's karma, and consciousness. So these three links, ignorance, karma, and consciousness, come together. So in the presentation of the 12 links, these are the first three, 1, 2, and 3, whereas craving, grasping, and existence are 8, 9, and 10. So when one accumulates a karmic imprint, which will later ripen as a propelling karmic imprint, the consciousness is present, that's where karma is posited, and ignorance, the ignorance of self-grasping, that too is present. So these three come together. They are enumerated, but they aren't sequential. They come together, ignorance, karmic formations, and consciousness. We're now spoken about in total 6 links. 6 of the 12 links. These 6 are causal factors. So these are the 6 that lead to a result. So the first group of 3 are ignorance, karmic formations, and consciousness. And the second group I spoke about earlier, craving, grasping, and existence. So these are the part of the process that lead us to take uncontrolled rebirth, life after life. This is the process we came into this existence, this life, as well as the life before, and the life before, and the life before that. This is this process of continued circling in cyclic existence through the accumulation of karmic imprints with ignorance, karma, or karmic formations and consciousness, later being ripened with craving, grasping into the existence. This is the process of us remaining bound in cyclic existence. This then is reflected on in the meditation on true origins.
On that dinigi, Lama Imbala, Lam Tarbi Lama Imbala, Tarbi Lam Imba, Re Sam Komje, Tene, Nichige, Yungre Sadi, Dekasul Yungorasine, Angan, something wishing you top charge, and Disul Yungore, Dinigi. Something wishing you top charge, and then all that, Chike Taratoyalia, Kanje, Sosukula. Lam Kasore, Yomoba Chasan, Gaje, Sim Chasan, Gaje, Gayam, Kimaju, Pa, Gaje, Gayan, and it Yomoba Chasan, Garu, Diniche, and it Tadi, Gabati, some died Lamdida, Tabatu Lamri, yes. Tadi, Dini, she saw the, and Inia, and it Kasore, Chia Ilamicha, Kasore, Sukhamgi Kamnalia, Yechen, Delia, the Dushimi Bawas, Kansha Chagore, Sisan Dini, that Delia, the Kaya Yomar, Yumopa, some Kaya Demazadini, that it Tabares and Gore. That it Tabare, the Toya, Tablam Delia, and the Setelia, that on the Deve Kam de la Machinella, Deve Kamlia, that Dushimi Bakaza said, someday Shibalure, someday Shibalure. And then that Dushi may be Numju comedy, or some debate in a Comore. Sizanko got some Dushi may be Numju said, some look came Paka, Kaya came out to Baje, Pakasha, Kasha, and indeed with the Mount Banada, Kaya, Numoba Kaya Meba, says some Namdo Kaya might give us Yungores. Is a daddy Tabare, some J, Tabato, the Toyega Dondala, and Tabamayim Bajela Tabayima tree. Says that the Toyega Lamdel. Dushimi, you said Kumbore, said a Gia, Macho Gaya, some Matajo, some Kuwin, Pakaka, Gimajubaja. Sukam, Dushime Boa, Dushi, some kind of Korea make in the G water. The detail is what the person, the child, Pondon, Naja, Kayamar, Tanga Unimer, there was a daddy Tarbare Samje, that did Tovegi, Tablam Delia, that Dushimi, Yumju said, Mushi Yumju coming, Gumgore. The Yumushim Bishine, Stupshine, things in Tobiki, 다 삼로 가야 콜마제 가고 가셔상가 녀모베 삼로 삼 녀모바다 녀모바 멤버 삼로 차상까지 고미야지 온 거래. 이 고미도 나디 삼로 가야 콜어요 말해. 두 곰곰곰과 디 곰네다 시르디 안 두심에 봐서 되 기르고 그래. 제사디 야는 기술도 다 탈바 톱송 섬 거라. 다 탈바 톱송 섬 디디가래. 난 탈봉은에 말을 받아. 나 되니게 누가 조진다 시에 기능들이 하고 예 하고 거야. 얘네 안에 록다기 거래. 어다기 타바데 타랑이 삼네 타바 톱민도 타바 여사 말에 타바 민도 셈비 록다기. 니 녀모 원기 록다기 되네. 신에는 야월 맞기로 해서 쓴 거래. 그래서 타바만 발라 타바 추와 타베 람만 발라 타베 람도 추와 디소리. that sumega kishme that sukham shishira dushime ba sukham gaya mare sukham chasa mare sukham gi samden shibige sajini jigla dushime ba nyumshu se ade limten ji ga da ga hap ji ga ma so na.
So this first part of the sentence, you will perceive as a path which is not the path to freedom from existence. So this specifically refers to a person who achieves actual clairvoyance, actual calm abiding, and with this powerful mind of calm abiding, they engage in the meditation to suppress the afflictions of the desire realm and continue to suppress the afflictions of the various levels of the form realm. And they're doing so thinking that they are achieving the path to liberation. And when death comes, the strong karmic imprints they've accumulated lead them to rebirth in the fourth level of the form realm. And there is a particular part of that fourth level of the form realm, which is called without discrimination. So it's like a suburb of this, the fourth level of the form realm. And they're born in this suburb called without discrimination. And they believe they've achieved liberation. They believe they have freedom from samsara. Why? Because they've suppressed all the various levels of afflictions. And they think, now I'm liberated. And they abide there, blissed out for a lengthy period. But they have not achieved liberation, despite what they think. Then when the karmic imprint that propelled this rebirth, when its potency, its strength is exhausted, and death is now approaching, then this being recognizes their mistake. They recognize they have not achieved liberation. And now they develop a wrong view, thinking liberation is not possible, because one can imagine that they will be particularly frustrated, having believed they achieved their goal and abiding in the result of their goal. But now they recognize they deceived themselves, and they fall to hell. The next rebirth will be in the low realms of hell. So this is the kind of person referred or meant here by you will receive as the path that which is not the path to freedom from existence.
다디 고미야디다 빈 마통와 다방바세 최고래. 제사다 시비기 시벌을 주에 람마인 바실라 람레 코와레 주에 탈비 람레 삼송제 망불로 망보 곰네 곰바지 깔레자레데 제고 탈바투고 말레스 지금에 바기 위치를 세대 되서.
So such a person, looking at the same sentence, will have endured hardships for many years. So they would have been striving to achieve liberation for many years. But they haven't identified the actual target. So what they're aiming for through their own path is actually not liberation. They've misidentified the target. Therefore, their hardships are fruitless in the sense of, despite striving for so many years, decades perhaps, the goal they achieve is not the goal they actually wanted, which was liberation. Instead, they achieve this subsection of the fourth concentration.
네, Pangja Dugun Mashina, Dinyawa Shive, Taba Yang Mumazimbe, Taba Dunyer Yang Lumbazam the Sivich Rose. Lumbazam the Sivich Rose. Elia, Pangja Dugun Mashina, Pangja Dugun Mashina, and Dinyawa Shive, Taba Mumazimbe, and Taba Dunyer, Dundu Yer Yang. Lombazam the Savage Rose. Taba Dunya Yang, Lombazam the Savage Rose.
They continue. And if you do not know suffering along with its origins as that which has to be abandoned, you will not identify the liberation that is their thorough pacification, whereby your striving for liberation will also end up as nothing but an arrogant presumption.
저 방자들 저 방고야들 저 먹어야 돼. 그래서는 동아도 고고 말에 동아대 봐도 먹어야 돼. 당저 강아체 동아대 봐들이. 진짜 동아대 봐도 방고고래 방차래. 진짜 동아대 봐야 유디야 방고디 군주대 말에. 진짜 방차 누군 마시나. 진짜 방고야기 동아 가리 마셔 봐죠. 동아야 유디 군주대 봐 강이 봐도 하고 신고고 그래서 네 마셔 봐 있나? 안에 방자니들 가르기 마 먹어 봐 있나? 내 뽕위기 녀월 시베 탈바 누군이 뽕비게 타위 녀월 시와스나 뽕바시고 뽕비게 타바양 하고 말이에요. 지산 타바양 미진베 타바하고 말이에요. 지산다 탈바세디 먼저 누군이 뽕비게 자원이 뽕비게 뽕바텔라 탈바시고래. 지산 먼저 누군이 마시나 내 뽕비 뽕바하고 말와. 지산 탈바하고 말해. 탈바하 먹으면서 소식이 탈바 투나 타바 dunyer 유스 Lava Inayang, Kolkani Lava Sam, Sosuke in Samta Lava Samado, Dondala, Tabatu Yirgo Mare, Tabatu Yil, Lamgumgo Maresor, Lumbasam to Season, Koranti Lava Sam Remato, Koranti Sambasamato, Dondala, Tatareo Maresor.
And if you do not know suffering, so true sufferings, along with its origins, true origins, as that which has to be abandoned. So in other words, if you haven't identified what it is that you need to abandon, the object of abandonment, namely true sufferings and its causes, the true origins, if that's not identified, you will not identify the liberation that is their thorough pacification. In other words, true cessation. You will not identify the state that is free from the true sufferings because true origins has not been abandoned. So again, if you haven't recognized what it is that you need to abandon, true suffering and true origin, you will not correctly understand the third true cessation because of not knowing what it is to be abandoned. And it continues, whereby your striving for liberation, cultivating the true paths, will also end up as nothing but an arrogant presumption. In other words, all the effort you put into supposedly cultivating true paths will be nothing more than just a vocal expression, nothing more.
마릭바다. 다 녀모바 탐지게 싸와 너 코와기와 렌스기 쪼데 마릭바드레샤다 마릭바드네 용도 오셈비가 이 세부하고 사는 데니 하고도 군주도 하고 와지. 나디 하고도 데니 숨바들라 삼나 갈당 거서 마릭바디나 다진 마릭바디나 나디 메가서 두그리 두고 말했어. 나 거기 다신디 다도 진바나시 용의니스 무슨 tum바레 말했어. 나디 다신이데 잡아지고 다진기 유디 간에 징기도 다진 세고 그 유디 간에 징기도 진바나시 안다다 두에 미도 스제바지 알아야 능어도 동반이 제바지 와서 다음에 봐도 제바지 진짜 우신 다진기 다른 거죠 니만에 잘 먹으시사 다진세 다도 아 세바지 나랑 신기 다도 봐 징기를 대진비되다 만절이야 로래야 나세까지 난것도 다 나와 나신지 类经度啊，的大些的下，的经把那些些，但那完 了那话拿性爱的都给民族生结巴结的，他的大生来结巴结结果嘞，他的大生的来结巴结，大生来结巴结的都现在当个中啊，在了那话拿都民族结巴结的，的那个结巴结的呢，大生来结巴，但什么送巴的理由的，送巴的理由的结巴结果嘞结。
This morning we spoke in detail about meditating on true sufferings now, and I've spoken a little about meditation on true origins. So what I've said already on meditating on true origins is it's an analytical meditation, so one engages in this meditation with mindfulness and vigilance, and one recognizes that the karmic imprint, the propelling karmic imprint that is ripened into propelling our rebirth, such as the rebirth we have, is ripened by the affliction of attachment on the presentation on the 12 links called craving and grasping. So attachment ripens into existence, the 10th link, and thereby one takes rebirth. That propelling karmic imprint which ripens at the time of death was accumulated earlier in that life or in a preceding life by the 3 links of ignorance, karmic formations, and consciousness. So this I mentioned earlier this afternoon. So within this, the primary origin is that of ignorance. It is ignorance is the pivotal factor in the accumulation of the contaminated karma. So the question then that we lead to ourselves to is the following, or maybe before I come to the question. So in the meditation, we reflect on how craving and grasping attachment leads to the ripening of a propelling karmic imprint, like existence, and that this propelling karmic imprint, that's the first step, the propelling karmic imprint itself was created previously by the links of ignorance, karma, and consciousness. So that's the second step. Now to the third step. So this is new. The third step in the meditation on true origins is, so if ignorance is the pivotal factor in true origins, can this ignorance be eradicated? So the particular ignorance that is being referenced is that of self-grasping. So one needs to look at self-grasping to see whether it is in accordance with reality or not. It's called an ignorance because it is not said not to be in accordance with reality, but this we need to come to recognize for ourselves. So self-grasping refers to a consciousness of grasping that grasps at the self as existing in the way that it appears. Just to say as a translator, this word grasping and self-grasping, it's a different Tibetan word to grasping as in craving and grasping. So it's not the same thing. In English, we say the same word, but it's a different understanding. Self-grasping is the way the mind grasps at the self. It's not attachment, which craving and grasping refers to attachment. Okay, back to what Genla said. So self-grasping, is this in accordance with reality or not? So how to investigate? First, one needs to come to recognize how the self appears to oneself, how the self appears in our mind. Then, we naturally grasp at the self as existing in the way that it appears. So this is all that is meant by self-grasping. The self appears to us in a particular way, and our mind grasps at that appearance as being correct, as being in accordance with reality. So now we need to investigate to see whether the way the self appears is the way that it exists or not. Because in this way, we'll come to see whether we are grasping at the way that the self does exist, or if our grasping is actually an ignorance because the self does not exist in this way. So here we investigate reality in terms of whether the self exists in the way that it appears or not.
Kala ema do rang ngwe ne juba zimba na duwe mi de cheba je du ye je da da dian jian zhao wa ju wa sam da du cheba je shi nga sa di rangi pungpunga po kanro la chikla tuyene pa lue shaba tsa mato pa tuyene lue shaba mayin pa koro ngone chubati tsaoki ni mindu sambade thongyo du dine dame pa tuwa res. Dame pa tuwa du deshi dazin tsawa marikpa nga rangi ngone chuba zinduwe de lo no chuyin pa lokshen pa hako. Ta lokshen pa lo no chuyin pa lokshen pa hako yodu oda di panya dus lo no chuyin sha lokshen sha ko pang tu dus ko pang pe panya dus. Side 내 방배 방보 여바디 통하고 그래. 방보 유비 여바 통데 탈바 통을 다 탈바디. 방보 여모가 다세 마리바 방비게 방바 여바디 통요도 탈바세 두스. 대시 탈바신이 또 말해. 어디니엘 탈바하고 탈바세 되면서 하고 여르세 맞다. 탈바 두고 말. 되니게 또 해도 다음에 봐 또 이거 되니 신이 탈바디 통고래. 탈바 두스다. 다 탈바 두세 통요도 얘네 탈바디 따디마서도 타면 토고 집에 탈바도 얘기 물어봐다. 제자다 탈바 토래. 나도 안다디 토야리야 가르다블리 저거랬네. 제자 고미야 가르 공부 남 가르 공부스네. 제자다 다음에 봐도 별로디 동방이 또 다음에 봐도 별로디 디고 컴퓨터 공부도 님보 디레샤다. 가사 다도 좀 다제 말이 봐 님보니 녀간디다. 다음에 봐도 동방이 또 비셔라 디레샤스. 다 디고 공부도 디 공부하려다 뭐 공부도 이야기 나발라다. 디니 곧 배tim부서 와라 신내고 그래 신내고 그래서 와다 삼대시 다대시 동방도 싫어하고 서와 다음에 또 봐. 싫었디 인연보 다신 인보인바 하고도 다디고 람디 공부도 다디 람디 공부 약부다 차와라 신내고 도스. 다 신내고 제집에 띵해서 남면 모두 모습 제집에 띵해서 신내고 도스. 신내주야. 지다다 신내 약고요를 준비하고지고 냠내야 준비 냠내지고도 준비 냠내야고요하다 되니 수심서야 쇠복음이하다 되니게 냠내지를 갑라 강한 몽골리기로 와 지다 쇠복음고도 쇠복음이하다 되니 수심서야 수심마서바이나 용하게 야고마서바이나 되니 쇠바야고금도 말 쇠바야고금마도는 띵인지 야고금도 말 에서 되니서 쇠복음발라 수심성고도 되니 집에 냠내지고도세 어두시네 림바디고 되니서 어디디 고미 림바 디레샤스 베 삼당 공고 고미레도 데네 람냠네 제바 람리아 제홈제제다 람냠네 제바데 제홈다 조금니가 용거다 두치는 람림바도 스tam보디 공니바디 숨도 진 공부와서 다디 냠네 림바 디레도 람고미 디레도 와서 두 제바자 하고 해야지 제홈 남은 제마도 제홈제 두 제홈제데 소람곰 졸람고 데네 징이진 신의 주역에 제집이 띵 고묘들 다시 조금책으로 와 삼대 신의 주도 조금책으로 신의 주 차례 동반에 제시도 고 민의 공부에는 조금책으로 와 남념는 제바들 남 공부들 제공나 조금 니가 해야 돼. 다들 동어 공부 군중 공부 공부 세들이야 제공마도 조금이야 말해. 다 남념는 님바들 해야 되네. 제공나 조금 니가 해. 제가 내내게다 제가 대신 냠는 지나도 두스네 삼로 코로나 대타들 님바든 지금 거래 제 당보 이제 없네. 말에 신이 주변에 내가서 조금 얘기를 와. 주만에 조금라고 검대다 조금 쳐. 그래서 되심 제지바 제지로 나가야 제지도 내가 삼마다 하지. 유제지도 내로 공부를 조금 해. 조금 있나 신이 인지미지 신의 주 고구 말해.
In this, so meditating on true origins, there were three parts thus far. So the first was what has been mentioned a couple of times, but looking at how attachment in the form of the links of craving and grasping ripen the propelling karmic imprint, that's existence. That's one step. And the cultivation of the propelling karmic imprint was done previously with ignorance, karmic formations, and consciousness. Second step. Then the third was what I've started to mention now, but it's something I'm just doing in brief because we've looked at it in detail in the past, which is to see whether the way the self appears is how it exists or not. Because we grasp at it as the way the self appears as being in accordance with reality. But the teachings tell us that it's not, and that this consciousness is an ignorance. But this we need to recognize for ourselves. This is investigation of reality in relation to the self. So one first looks at how the self appears to try and come to recognize that the self appears as if it is something that is, and I'll use synonyms, self-existent, or under its own power, under its own free will, something that is independent or not dependent. So the self appears to be this separate entity that is not dependent on, for example, the body and mind. This is how the self appears to us, as if it is under its own power. We see then how it appears, and this is how the self appears. We grasp at it. This is self-grasping. And we investigate to see whether it exists in the way that it appears, and how to do that investigation. I'm not going to cover now. We've covered in the past. That we investigate, we come to recognize the self does not exist in the way that it appears. It's not under its own power or self-existence or not dependent. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And this, when one comes to realize that the self does not exist in the way that it appears, one comes to realize selflessness. And with this understanding of selflessness, one recognizes that self-grasping is an ignorance. Because here, ignorance means not in accordance with reality. So self-grasping, one grasps at itself in a way that it does not exist. Therefore, because the self appears in a way it doesn't exist, we grasp at it, and that is an ignorance, because the self doesn't exist in this way. The recognition of this is a wisdom. It's a wisdom understanding selflessness. When one has a taste of this, one recognizes, I can cultivate. It is possible, and it's possible for me to cultivate the wisdom realizing selflessness, which is the direct antidote to the root cause of all suffering, to the true origin of suffering, the ignorance of self-grasping. If I can cultivate this direct antidote, that means I can destroy the root cause, the true origin of suffering, and thereby abandon true sufferings and again a complete, lasting cessation of suffering. In other words, liberation. So this is where one recognizes that true cessations are possible, and it's possible for me. It is within my grasp. It is not just something theoretical, and it's not something beyond me. So this then is how one comes to recognize true cessations are something that need to be attained. Then one will, with deep yearning, inquire how to do so. You all know that means cultivating true paths. So what I'm describing here is these last few lines from Lama Tsongkhapa. One will then know one needs to cultivate true paths. How to cultivate true paths? For one's virtuous qualities to be developed into the actual strength and stability that they would be called a path or mental path, one requires a powerful analytical mind that is also very stable. Because up to now, all our meditations have been analytical meditations, all of them, and we've been doing our best not to be distracted. But our meditation's weak, our mindfulness and vigilance are weak. So we recognize we haven't achieved a path. To achieve a path, we need a stable mind that is also able to analyze in a way that is undistracted. So this is the union of calm abiding and meditative insight. This is indispensable to develop an actual path, to develop the true paths. So this is then what one will set oneself on eventually achieving. One will also have come to recognize through one's study and reflections that to develop this union of calm abiding meditative insight requires excellent ethical restraint, where one's mind is restrained from coming under the influence of the afflictions, as well as excellent patience, Because a mind that is not patient is a mind that's going to be influenced by their afflictions. It's also a mind that is not going to persevere. So therefore, one also needs a quality of enthusiastic perseverance, a mind that takes delight in cultivating ethics, patience, and so forth, and empowered by the virtue from generosity. So therefore, one knows to cultivate true paths, one has to develop a union of calm abiding and meditative insight, which require excellent ethical restraint, as well as patience, enthusiastic perseverance, and generosity. So in this way, one engages in further analytical meditations, cultivating the supportive practices of ethics, patience, generosity, enthusiastic perseverance, developing these analytical meditations so that one has sufficient skill of mind to actually develop placement meditation. So thus far, every meditation that has been one of analysis, of thought, of thinking. When one comes to cultivating calm abiding, this is when one now is developing placement meditation, where one isn't analyzing, but trying to place one's mind in a manner that is still unwavering on the object of meditation, without analysis, just still. So here, when it comes to true paths, one comes to utilize both analytical meditation and placement meditation.
타바세 토기 하고 다 타바 토기도 타바도 맞춘다 탑민도 세베 타바 되니 삼바기 고로 지자다 타바 토고자데 토에게 탑람 가르도슨 람 냠슬렘바 곰발레틴 토고도세 대지에도 다 하고도 되네 나 배주지에 조디 람냠레 지야를 내용으로다 지자도 진리인 바디다 말되기 대지 제름시 소만하시 안데상이 점내디 동아 템바 군주한테 되네 고대 남된 땜바 나신지 로말리아 치다도 치오레사디 나도시는 가지고 자죄지야다 삼다에도 도시는 삼당 오그리에서 숨고래 되네 소에도 당한테 남된디 하고 있는데 되네 하고 해도 되네 나데 다 고외 동아들 마당아 코와들 마탄데 탑민도 고외 동아들 탈바진지 토구도 마탄데 탑민도 몇 삼노디 고미야디다 디 곰제 디곰베 때문에 탈바도인 삼바 디때에다 다 미침바다야도 줄무서 저반념네 제디 다 기부팅기 투모 기팅게 가서 남념네 제 조어디리다 예 제사다 콜외 동을 탈바 토구도 아마도네 탑민도 세베게 탈바도인 삼바기에 자야디다 기부팅기네 하고 자야 조어디리 되니기 장전되니 탈바토에 돈다라야 짐버스르스 변념네 제바디 기부팅게 남념네 바시고
Lama Tsongkhapa then has presented the Four Noble Truths here for us. And as he says earlier in this paragraph, this presentation of the Four Noble Truths is a major threshold for practice. Therefore, students need to be guided in this order. And the order then is meditating well on true sufferings. And I presented it this morning in terms of the threefold presentation on the suffering of physical mental pain, the suffering of transient pleasure, and all pervasive suffering of conditioning. Looking at this repeatedly so that one develops a revulsion for the sufferings of samsara, a renunciation of the sufferings of samsara. And having developed this powerful revulsion for the sufferings of samsara, one will seek out the origins and come to recognize that it's contaminated karma, but in particular, our afflictions. So the power of the revulsion or the renunciation for the sufferings of samsara that has arisen, that power will continue as we are investigating the true origins and lead to a determined attitude Now that I'm understanding the origins of my suffering, I have to eradicate them. And one will then have the strength of mind, this power of the revulsion or renunciation for suffering, to seek out the root of the root cause of our suffering. Coming to understand intellectually that it is the ignorance of self-grasping, we will then investigate further. Can this ignorance be eradicated? And when we recognize, actually, I can. By developing my wisdom, I can eradicate the ignorance of self-grasping. Now I know intellectually, but through some experience, that I can bring about a complete cessation of suffering. I can bring about liberation from samsara, freedom from samsara. This is the third truth, true sufferings. I see that this is attainable. I must strive to achieve it. And again, still powered by that initial realization of the revulsion for the sufferings of samsara, renunciation for the sufferings of samsara, one then is determined to cultivate the true paths. And these are mentioned briefly, but they come down to cultivating virtue through generosity, restraining one's mind from the afflictions through ethics. And now one's ethical restraint is greatly empowered through understanding the harm the afflictions do. And this too then aids our cultivation of patience because of our determination to achieve the final goal. This then helps with our enthusiasm and then development of calm abiding and our desire to eventually develop wisdom too. So this then is how we come to the fourth truth, true paths. And this training here is what will lead us to develop the mind of definite emergence, the determined attitude to emerge from the sufferings of samsara and gain liberation. These are the trainings that are shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity. These are the trainings which are the preliminary to cultivate actual bodhicitta. So therefore, it's by training here well in the Four Noble Truths, in the guided in this order, as Lama Tsongkhapa wrote, that we will come to develop the goal of this training, the mind of definite emergence.
Dembashi dunga demba se da kunju demba se da go den da lam den re sa sam le yang so ya ande nyamlen che ba le nyamlen che da dunga demba nyamlen de che ba de kunju demba de ne go den sam da li de ne lam ne le ge se be de ne ge rin ba zhuo da di nyamlen rin ba che da go zhuo da de hao go wa zhen bi be ma si be za qin bo dang an ju ya pan de qin bu xu cha de re dang zhe ge ni ji ji wo ji ya wo cha de ru ba be na ji ge 刚才不是这样的嘞，这桌上蒙古人话，刚才不这么这样的个，就是卡有的，那桌上蒙古人话，但的那个说刚才不这么行为呢，刚才不这趟的桌上的好过问呢，的就是我们这么看的机会没，可能是努力有没去，桌上的好过问呢，那这么大时候呢，就我在这丢了说的话，就是错了没啥说的话，有点还没忘记，桌上有点还没忘记当。 de ne ge so so ma zin na zhuo dang de hao guo nim de zhuo wei ne gu ni bai ko sim le cuo zai de mo de sim le cuo mi zhuo ji yong gu ba de jing di xia le xia yo ma le jing di de ko zhuo dang yo ba o di ji ma de di jie de ne jie gu lo sim bi ge zhuo dang hao gu ba ji zang so so ma zai wei ne ge si di zhuo dang hao guo de ne di zai mo zai na le zai ge ju wei ne so so ya wo zai ma de ne ga han zhe le ji ji de gu lo a de de gu lo on di na xi 俺最电视伢们那个最在定俺最伢们要我去马就呗呢，在那个东海的电把戏我吹家的，电把戏伢们去在人把电热啥的，但第好个我怎么俺最呀，别嘛是个咱伢们人把接了呀，他年做呀的，俺那些都是吃过的，别呢刚才不怎么这趟桌上也不好过很这个，但怎么嘛这边呢好过呢？怎么这样的现在个要这样的呀，咱们上。 要不用土路啊，你那些吃过的，咱别嘛是给全部吃的了的。现在在电信内陆的，给需要咱们这些，咱们就搞动全部的一些的。现在在的，咱们什么大的，人家讲究什么，那这人家去，像咱们的这个，你西的那说的呀，我马上回呢，咱们的这土也好有嘛的。现在的呢，在这些我的给全部修吃的了。
Now we've looked at, in some detail, at an overview of the Four Noble Truths. And I just want to emphasize again how incredibly important understanding the Four Noble Truths is. And I say this so that you each individually can generate great joy in this knowledge that has been gained. Because knowing the Four Noble Truths in some detail is of great benefit. Understanding the true sufferings, what is meant in Buddhism by suffering, understanding the subtle details, so suffering of transient pleasure, as well as all pervasive suffering of conditionality. Coming to know true sufferings well, this knowledge empowers you. This knowledge empowers you because one comes to recognize that all these delights that draw me, so the things that I get excited about achieving and enjoying and my goals and my hopes, as well as the problems and difficulties that dominate my mind, these things, as long as they're bound in samsara, cannot lead to happiness. Knowing true sufferings will help this greatly. Likewise too, true origins, coming to recognize why we are in this situation, why everyone around us is in this situation, recognizing the futility of striving for things of no real value when we will just die and be reborn in dependence on the karma we've created. Coming to recognize that right at the very root of our suffering, these various afflictions, and with ignorance at its root, we come to see this is what I need to abandon. This gives us the strength of mind to restrain ourselves not to follow the afflictions, whether it's a mind of anger pushing others away or a mind of attachment pulling things to us. Recognize the harm that these afflictions do. And then having the space, the mental space from a stiller mind to look at our ignorance, to abandon our ignorance. And thereby, when we come to recognize that by abandoning true origins, we will actualize true cessations, this will give us confidence. This theory is possible for me. I can do it. And with that, we'll have the strength of mind to strive to cultivate true paths. Then all other things in life will be seen in their truer perspective. What really has value is cultivating the qualities of the Dharma within. These are what we'll take in the terms of karmic imprints with us from life to life. These are what will enable us to live a life of great meaning now and in lives to come. So to make an analogy, so if you think of a young person, many young people enjoy sports. They may have a great love for soccer. And soccer to play is not particularly complex. You kick a ball around on your own or maybe with some friends, and you can have fun, and you can play at that level for years, and it can be entertaining and a good time. But if that young person comes under the guidance of a skilled coach, that coach will teach them how to develop various skills and also teach them not just about the development of skills, but strategy. Then not only will they get better at the game, not only will they start to excel, they will see this development. They'll get excited by this development and they'll want to apply themselves to their training. And in fact, the intricacies of the game will probably dominate their thinking. Whatever they're doing, they'll be thinking about soccer and they'll want to play it ever more because their enthusiasm is growing, because their skill is growing. So similarly, by engaging in these meditations, in a deeper level, on these Four Noble Truths, by coming to recognize the suffering nature of cyclic existence and its origins, and these origins can be brought to cessation by cultivating paths, as we reflect more on this, we will feel empowered. We'll feel a sense of confidence, rather than feeling like someone blown around by the winds of karma, blown around by problems arising and suffering arising. We'll come to recognize by developing certain qualities, I can gain more control over my mind and thereby how I experience the sufferings of samsara. And in this way, through developing a deep understanding of the Four Noble Truths, one comes to develop a deep confidence that I'm not helpless in the face of my karma. By developing my mind, I'm developing the causes that will lead to my liberation. And this confidence will lead us to applying ourselves with ever greater ease, ever greater enthusiasm to cultivating the true paths within. And this too then is the indispensable foundation for the for the subsequent trainings, those of the practitioner of great capacity, coming to gain deeper insight into the suffering of ourselves is the basis to come to gain insight in the suffering of others. Hence, this is the preliminary to later develop bodhicitta. Without this preliminary, bodhicitta and the trainings of great capacity cannot be cultivated. Something that I've said throughout our weekend together, but I want to emphasize now, is that these meditations are all in relation to oneself. In that, when I've spoken about true sufferings, we're looking at how we each individually suffer. When we spoke about true origins, we're talking about our own afflictions leading to accumulation of our own contaminated karma, with the root cause being our own ignorance of self-grasping. And in terms of reflecting on whether this self-grasping is an ignorance or not, and recognizing that it is an ignorance, and that we can, by developing the wisdom realizing selflessness, gain liberation, bring about a cessation to our suffering. This too is in relation to ourselves. And thereby, I need to cultivate the true paths by training in generosity ethics and so forth. This is how to engage in this meditation in relation to one's own lived experience. Because right now, we ourselves are suffering and we all have the wish to gain freedom from suffering. Look within ourselves, because this is whom we can see most clearly. Come to know oneself first. This entire meditation, we look at our own minds our own situation. When one comes to the point where one has recognized that liberation is possible, that one can bring about a cessation of suffering, and is thereby committed to striving and is striving to cultivate paths, one has a deep conviction in the Dharma. So this is the mind of definite emergence, a deep conviction in the Dharma and definite about striving to emerge from the sufferings of samsara and bring about a liberation. So one here is definite in the Dharma, and one has a deep confidence, a deep confidence that I can transform my mind radically and thereby gain freedom. With this deep conviction in the Dharma and a deep confidence in oneself, then when one now lifts one's gaze and looks at the situation of others, one will be able to give rise to compassion with relative ease. Because when one lifts one's gaze, one recognizes that every being that I know, every being that I've ever known, every being ordinary being that exists, yearns for happiness just like I do, but remains bound in the suffering realms of samsara for the same reasons as I am. And one knows these reasons, particular ignorance of self-grasping. And one comes to recognize how beings deceived by their afflictions continue to create the causes that will only lead to suffering, continue to create the causes that strengthen the bars on their prison of samsara. And seeing this and recognizing the commonality between ourselves and others, compassion will naturally arise. But this compassion, for it to be the compassion of the Dharma, it is not just a mere empathy for others, but it has to come from a mind that is strong, a mind that is powerful, a mind that is confident. This confidence comes from striving for true paths, by having recognized that true cessations are possible. Because then one recognizes, if others were to train like I am, they could achieve this. It's not beyond them, in the same way as it's not beyond me. They just need a skilled guide. So whilst I'm striving to cultivate true paths, I can also do so with the wish to be of benefit to them. So this is a confidence approach. This is a mind that says, I can look to help others beyond myself because I am perfectly capable to look after myself and look after others. This confident mind then, when compassion arises in a confident mind like this, one will not get burnt out by compassion. One will not become exhausted by caring for limitless beings because of this deep confidence. So again, to bring about this confidence requires the cultivation of definite emergence, which requires deep reflection on the Four Noble Truths in relation to one's own situation. To the extent that one develops the Four Noble Truths within oneself, or the realization of the Four Noble Truths develops definite emergence, to that extent, compassion will easily arise.
난 이제 이게 시디 당 원숨도 지다와 신도 원숨도 또 한데 파배고 뭐 돕는 바도 또 그 말. 나 저기 다 제바체 삼다 도시 농화된 바도 군전된 바 하고 대람된 또 비네 그 따라되는 김제 삼다 또 마도 원숨도 또 두고 말와. 당 원숨도 지마 지신 또 한데다 파배 가사 되게 또 그러와. 얘자 파배된 바 시세야 돼. 파배 원숨도 지다와 신 또 완전 또 한데 파배인데 파배된 바 시스 송거와. 베네가 저디로와 베네 시빈 마선 조디 소식이看봐 녀와 있나 타직 제레가 녀네 조지 녀사회 제라 전부 제기녀 말아 조 시빈 세디 조디는 지어래서 베게 남사 시빈 거 계시는데看봐 추고야 되네 레라 되네시 제디 원숨 두고 시빈이 조디가 제를 봐다 지녀도 원숨 또 하래 다디스네 제기녀 메가리다 마시고도 제메 조디는 지어서 지사단 밀야 되네지는 그때네 콜레디지도 어디 조디는 용거를 해야 되는 저기 다소수 녀의 토네 and sipping you draw guineas, Magnon way now to Magnon way now. I see in the castle did it in the Yores and Michi here in the draw things Yores and be some motto. Dizigirang to get a chick humor. That Mishanda Devon the draw in this Yores, it didn't younger as a motto, she was all as Merva. That is sipping you draw, didn't in the Yores, she and how quiet it down. So Sugi also known how quiet in a tire or dinner. That don't want them about Kunju, what the Lamrim said, and Zugi, that Jumzen Samna, Jebachu, Toya data, that power big Jebachu, awesome the toy, but that Missigi that or Toal Masona, Jebachu, Papa Chadway, Zeta, Papi Tembala, or you give the Papi Temba, she said. Temba, that Temba she larva, Temba she Papi Temba she legor, Kunju Temba, what the Lamrim said. Elia, Papi Temba Shila Guru. Love good. She said, Mare. Papi Temba Shila Guru, Jumsan Garela, Papi Temba Dunga de Bukunju Temba, the Papi Temba Lago, the Lago Jumsan, Papi almost the Toans, that was almost some Toans, that Papi Temba Minta, yes, Minta, Jumsan, Papi Temba, Papa Namji, Chidawa, she almost Toba, and I to get Toba in a Talat in Toma, almost some tomato. The Papa Mijidawa almost some Toba. Papi Temba. Is that a country that wants to the Sibin the guy and you had that you were there?
So let's talk about this term, Four Noble Truths, which is how it's always translated, but it will be clearer as four truths for Aryas or for Arya beings, four truths for Arya beings. So these are something that you all now have an understanding of, but it's only Arya beings who have directly realized them. So it's only Arya beings for whom these four are truths, because it's only Arya beings who have directly realized them. For us now, we have some intellectual understanding and independence on the prior meditations you have done. You may have a deeper understanding of them, but they are not yet truths for us. They're not yet real for us because seen as real or true because they haven't been directly realized. This can be likened to if someone has never eaten chili. They can hear someone describe it, so it's very hot or it's very tasty, it adds flavor to food, and they can hear a description, and they may think, oh, it sounds nice, or it doesn't sound nice. They'll have some reaction to the description. They'll be very weak. But if they've eaten it, because they have directly experienced it, when they either think about chili, or that someone tells them, or let's go buy some chili, or this food has chili in it, then because they have experienced it, they will have a very different reaction. So this is like for us, we hear about the Four Noble Truths, we aspire to achieve them, but our reaction is quite muted. But for an Arya being, they know these four to be true because they have direct experience of them. They have directly realized them. So this then is the meaning of this term, Four Truths for Aryas. It's only Arya beings, those who have attained the path of seeing and beyond, who know that these four, suffering, origin, cessation, and paths, are true, are in accordance with reality.
And Jelen, the Dunga Demba, some Dana, Dunga Yesamba, True Samba, set in Ma, to see that Dunga Demba, some Dana or Shua, Yava Shua.
We can conclude here now, and you can see from the very next outline, next time when we gather in a couple of weeks, we will, having concluded a general presentation of the Four Noble Truths, we'll start to look at them in detail, starting with the first, true sufferings, and the presentation we've covered in brief earlier today, the threefold presentation, but the text presents first the eightfold presentation of suffering in detail, and then, in brief, the sixfold presentation on suffering. So that's where we'll start then, next time. Then thank you. We'll conclude there for now. Thank you.